The gate latch rattled like a bone shaking loose from a frozen joint, and Clayton Turner was on his feet before his eyes were fully open. He had lived long enough on the northern roads to know that nothing good came knocking at a man's gate at midnight in the deep of winter. Not in Harrow's Reach. Not in the year that Lord Aldrich Voss had seized the keep and started sending his tax riders out in pairs with cudgels instead of ledgers. Clayton crossed his small trading post in 3 strides, snatched the lantern off the hook, and pressed himself flat against the wall beside the door with his short-bladed road knife already in his hand. Old habit. The kind you kept because the men who forgot it were buried before they turned 40. The rattling stopped. Then came a sound he had not heard in 4 years, a low, grinding hiss through clenched teeth, the precise sound a person made when they were trying very hard not to make any sound at all, when the pain was so enormous that silence itself had become a kind of war. He knew that sound. He knew it in the way you know a piece of music you heard only once at a summer fair a decade ago, immediately, completely, and with a cold drop in your stomach. Clayton unbolted the door. The lantern light swept out across the packed snow of his small yard, and there she was, one enormous green hand gripping the top iron rail of his gate, her other arm wrapped hard across her middle. She was tall, nearly a full head taller than him, broad-shouldered and powerful even now, even bent slightly at the waist against whatever wound she was pressing her arm over. Her dark hair was loose and wild around her face, tangled with ice crystals, and her gray-green skin had that particular waxy sheen that came with blood loss. She wore fitted warrior's leathers, a close-cut double-laced bodice of dark charcoal leather that followed the long line of her torso and the flare of her hips, matching bracers at her wrists, and leather breeches that hugged the powerful column of her thighs and tucked into knee-high boots. The lacing along the left side of the bodice was dark and wet, and even from 10 feet away Clayton could see the black glitter of blood soaking through. Her eyes found his across the yard. They were the color of old amber, bright and hard and furious even now. Zarkha Steeljaw, after 4 years. She did not ask for help. She did not say his name. She looked at him through the gate bars with those burning amber eyes, and the only thing on her face was a kind of iron refusal to fall down, a stubbornness so total it had become its own architecture, something she was built around rather than something she felt. Clayton was already moving. He crossed the yard with the lantern high, threw the gate bolt, and caught her at the elbow as the latch gave and the gate swung and her weight shifted dangerously forward. She was heavy the way all orcs were heavy, dense with muscle and bone in a way that had nothing to do with size and everything to do with what they were built for, and he planted his feet and took all of it without complaint. "Inside," he said. She moved without argument, which told him more than any words could. The last time Zarkha Steeljaw had done something without arguing about it first, she had been unconscious. He got the door shut behind them and steered her toward the low bench beside the fire. His trading post occupied the ground floor of a squat stone building, 2 rooms really, the front room where he kept his dry goods and his ledgers and a small writing table, and the back room where he slept and cooked. He had a good fire going, the kind he always kept through northern nights because the cold in Harrow's Reach from first frost to late thaw was not the poetic cold of songs but a hard, structural cold that could kill a man who let his fire go to coals. He set the lantern on the table and turned back to her. She had gotten herself onto the bench and was sitting very still, which was another bad sign. Her jaw was tight, the lower tusks catching the firelight. He had always found her tusks startlingly beautiful in the way that anything naturally made and perfectly formed was beautiful, and this was not the moment to think about that, so he did not. "Let me see," he said. "It is not deep." "Let me see, Zarkha." The amber eyes flicked up to his. Something moved behind them that was not quite vulnerability and not quite anger. It was closer to the expression of someone who had traveled a very long way to a very specific place and was only now permitting themselves to acknowledge why. She moved her arm. The cut ran from just below her left ribs to her hip, curving slightly, the kind of wound a blade made when it slid along rather than punched through. It was not deep enough to have reached anything vital, but it was long and it had been bleeding for a while. Her leather bodice was stiff with dried blood and wet with fresh. He could see where she had packed it with something, a strip torn from her sleeve, now sodden. "Right," he said. "Do not move." He went to the back room and got his medical kit, a tin box he never traveled without, the accumulation of 15 years on the northern roads, filled with needle and waxed thread, clean linen, a small clay pot of drawing salve, and a flask of strong spirits. He pulled the kettle from the fire's edge and found it still warm. He brought all of it back, and without preamble he set to work. She did not make a sound while he cleaned the wound, not one. He stitched it closed with the careful, small stitches the old road surgeon from Thornwall had taught him a decade ago, 10 neat loops across the length of the cut, and she sat with her hands flat on her thighs and her jaw locked, and her amber eyes fixed on the far wall like she was looking through it at something only she could see. When he tied off the last stitch and began wrapping linen around her middle, her breath came out in one long, slow exhalation, the first honest sound she had made since she walked through his gate. He sat back on his heels and looked up at her. She did not say thank you. She did not look down at him immediately. She was still looking at that invisible point on the far wall, and he could see the muscles in her jaw working. And then she turned her head and looked at him, and her amber eyes were very, very close, and she still did not say anything. What she did was reach out with one large hand and rest it on top of his head for exactly 2 seconds. The way you might touch something you were checking was real. Then she let her hand drop. "You have tea?" she asked. Clayton Turner looked at her for a moment. Then he stood and he went and put the kettle fully on the fire, and the answer he gave was, "Yes." He made tea. She sat by his fire. She did not thank him. He did not ask her to, and she stayed. That was the thing about Zarkha Steeljaw that had undone him 4 years ago and apparently again now. She did not stay anywhere she did not choose to stay. She was a free company warrior, one of the best scouts the Northern Roots had ever seen, loyal to whoever paid her honestly and afraid of nothing that walked, flew, or crawled through the winter dark. She could have gone anywhere. She always could. She had more roads open to her than almost anyone he knew, because she was very good at what she did, and because she was old orc nobility in a way that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with bearing. She walked into any room and the room rearranged itself around her without her trying. And 4 years ago, she had been here, in Harrow's Reach, on a contract to scout the Varan Pass for the old Lord Brennick before Aldrich Voss put an axe through Brennick's succession and seized the keep. She had been here, and Clayton had been setting up his trading post for the second winter, and they had met over a bad deal. She had tried to sell him a map she had made of the Varan approaches, and he had told her it was worth twice what she was asking, and she had looked at him like he had said something in a foreign language. She had come back the next morning to argue with him about why he was wrong to double her price. That argument had lasted 3 hours and ended with her sitting at his small table drinking his tea and drawing corrections on the map while he copied it out, and they both pretended that neither of them was watching the other do things with their hands. 3 months of that. 3 months of her dropping by between contracts. 3 months of sitting on opposite sides of a table or a fire. 3 months of charged looks and careful distances, and one extraordinary evening in late thaw when she had kissed him first, hard and certain, with her hand flat on the middle of his chest, and the taste of pine spirits on her mouth, and he had kissed her back just as certainly, and the whole careful distance had collapsed in the best possible way. Then Aldrich Voss had seized the keep. There had been violence and disruption, and Zarkha had been contracted to a warband moving north to the high reach passes. And the last morning he had seen her she was already in the saddle, and she had looked down at him from the height of her big gray horse, and she had said in that flat, direct way she had, "I will come back when this is finished," and he had said, "I know," and he had believed her, and she had ridden north, and 4 years had passed in which she had not come back. Until now. Until midnight. Until bleeding. He brought her the tea and she wrapped both hands around the clay mug and the firelight moved across her face in the way it did in this specific room, warm and amber, and he thought she was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen, and he sat down in the chair across from her and said, "Tell me what happened." She looked at him over the rim of the mug for a long moment. "Voss," she said. "He has tax riders now," Clayton said, "with cudgels. He has more than that." She drank, set the mug down, held his gaze with those terrible amber eyes. "He sent an assassination team north to the high reaches 6 weeks ago. 4 men. They are very good. I was riding with the Greymark Company, you know them, Alvar Seld and his people. I know Alvar, good man. Good man, yes, dead now." Her voice was flat, not empty. That flatness was a kind of precision, the way she handled things that mattered most. "Voss's men hit them 2 nights ago at the Thornback Crossing. I was the only one who got out." A pause. "I was not supposed to get out. But you did." "I always get out, no pride in it, just fact." "Where are the 4 men now?" "2 are dead. The other 2 are a day behind me, maybe less. They will not stop. Voss wants this region sealed. Anyone who can speak to what happened to Brennick's succession, anyone who was there, who saw, who knows, he wants them gone." She turned the mug in her hands. "I have a ledger. Alvar was keeping it. Every contract, every payment, every order that came down from Voss's men in the months before he took the keep. It proves Brennick's son is still alive, and that Voss has been paying assassins to find the boy and silence him before he comes of age." She paused. "I took it from Alvar's saddlebag before I ran. I have it." Clayton looked at her steadily. "You rode 4 days bleeding with a ledger that could unseat Aldrich Voss. Closer to 3 days." She tilted her head fractionally. "I am fast." "You are," he agreed. "You are also an idiot." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something more specific than that, the twitch of recognition you got when someone said something familiar in the exact right way. "Where is the ledger now?" he asked. "My saddlebag, my horse is in your lean-to. I hope that is acceptable." "I heard her," he said. "She's fine. I'll check her in the morning." A silence came down between them, not uncomfortable, more like the silence of 2 people who are taking careful stock. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had been blowing steadily all evening, driving snow against the north-facing walls of the trading post, and the building made its habitual winter sounds, small creaks, the occasional moan from the chimney pipe. Clayton had spent 4 winters here and he knew every one of those sounds. He found, sitting here now with Zarkha on the other side of the fire, that the trading post sounded different than usual, less like quiet, more like settled. "You came here," he said. "Yes. Of all the places, you came here." Zarkha set down her mug and looked at him with those amber eyes, and she said, in the same flat, direct way she said everything, "You were always where I ended up, Turner. 4 years changes nothing about that." He did not know what to do with that. He sat with it for a moment, the way you sit with a thing that is too valuable to handle carelessly. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "Yes." He made food. She ate. They did not talk about the 4 years. Not yet. It was late, and she had lost blood, and there were 2 killers on the road a day behind them, and some things required sleep before they could be properly held. He gave her his bed and he took the bench by the fire with a rolled blanket, and before she lay down she stood in the doorway to the back room and looked at him and said, one more time with a different weight than before, "You were always where I ended up." He looked back at her. "I know," he said. "Get some sleep." In the morning the snow had deepened by 6 inches, and the sky was the color of iron, and Zarkha was already up and sitting at his table with the ledger open in front of her, and a half-eaten piece of bread at her elbow, when he built the fire up and put water on for porridge. She had checked her own stitches in the night. He could see she had retightened the linen wrap, and she was moving with her usual deliberate power, the wound pulling at her enough to keep one arm slightly close to her side but not enough to slow her. Her dark hair was pulled back, which meant she was working. She only pulled her hair back when she was working. Clayton came around the table and looked at the ledger over her shoulder without touching it. The pages were dense with figures, names, dates. Alvar Seld had been thorough. There were 3 entries that referenced a man named Colt Brennick, the old lord's son, the rightful heir, 15 years old last autumn by the dates in the ledger. "Where is the boy?" Clayton asked. "That is the question." Zarkha turned a page. "The last confirmed location in here is a village called Fenner's Crossing 2 months ago. That is 40 miles southwest. I know Fenner's Crossing. I trade there." He straightened up and moved to start breakfast. "I know most of the families. There's a man named Oscar Reel, he keeps the mill. Good man, quiet, the kind of man who would hide a child." He paused. "I drove a wagon load of milled grain north from Reel's mill to Harrow's Reach in the early autumn. He gave me more than the weight I paid for. I thought he was being generous." He paused again. He was nervous. Zarkha turned in her chair and looked at him. "You think the boy is with Reel? I think it's worth knowing." She was quiet for a moment, in the way she was quiet when she was fitting pieces together. He knew that silence well. He had missed that silence in a specific, physical way, the way you missed a particular quality of light in a room you used to live in. "The 2 men following me," she said. "They may not know about the ledger. They may only be here to finish the contract." "Or they may have guessed you took something," Clayton said. "Yes. So we have a day, maybe less, before they arrive in Harrow's Reach." He set porridge to cook and turned around to lean against the counter with his arms folded. "And we have a ledger that can unseat a usurper, a hidden heir we haven't confirmed, and 2 professional killers on the road south." "Yes," she said again. Her amber eyes were bright and measuring and fixed on him. "You could walk away from this. It is not your fight. Someone hiding a child in a mill house made it every decent person's fight," Clayton said. "And anyway, you are here, which means I am already in it." Something shifted in her expression. It was subtle. Zarkha Steeljaw did not wear her feelings on her face in any conventional way, but he had learned to read the shifts, and this one had a heat to it that went all the way down. "Clayton," she said. "Eat your porridge," he said, and turned back to the fire. They spent the morning planning. Clayton knew these roads better than anyone. That was not arrogance. It was the simple truth that 15 years of trading the northern routes had given him, the kind of knowledge that lived in a man's feet and hands as much as his head. He knew where the road from the north crossed the river, where the crossing was ice-free, where a person coming from the Thornback direction would have to pass through. He knew which of the townspeople in Harrow's Reach were genuinely loyal to Voss, and which were afraid, and which were merely waiting for a reason to be otherwise. He also knew that sending word to any of the distant lords or councils was a winter journey of at least 2 weeks in current conditions, which meant they could not wait for outside help. Whatever was going to happen here was going to happen with the people and resources already in this frozen outpost. "The innkeeper," Zarkha said when he finished walking her through the town. "Margit, you said she hated Voss." "She lost her eldest son in the week of the coup. He was one of Brennick's house guard." Clayton nodded. "She hates Voss the way cold hates warmth. And the smith, Durin, he lost his forge contract when Voss's men brought in their own iron worker from the south. He is angry and he is capable. Then we have allies." She folded her hands on the table. "Here is what I think we do." He listened. She was a tactical mind of the first order, and the plan she laid out was clean and direct. Ride to Fenner's Crossing today, confirm the boy, bring him back with the ledger to Margit's Inn, send runners south to the nearest lord who had been displaced by Voss, and in the meantime deal with the 2 men following her before they reached the town. "Deal with," Clayton said carefully. Her amber eyes were level. "Contain, discredit, expose. I do not murder men I do not have to murder." "Good." He unfolded his arms. "Then we ride." It was the kind of cold that morning that got inside a man's cloak and just lived there. But the horses were rested, and the road to Fenner's Crossing was one Clayton knew with his eyes shut. Zarkha rode beside him on her gray, sitting straight in the saddle despite the wound, scanning the tree line on both sides with the automatic attention of a trained scout. They moved fast, taking the back roads because she said the 2 men following her would most likely approach by the main north road. And if they were very lucky, Voss's killers would reach Harrow's Reach and spend half a day hunting her trail before realizing she had already been and gone south. The village of Fenner's Crossing was small and gray under the winter sky. A handful of stone buildings clustered around the mill race, wood smoke from 6 chimneys, dogs barking as they rode in from the east track. Clayton rode directly to the mill. Oscar Reel was a compact, careful man in his 50s with a permanent flower dust pallor and eyes that watched everything from under heavy brows. He came to his own door and looked at Clayton and looked at Zarkha and did not immediately slam the door, which Clayton took as a good sign. "Reel," Clayton said, "I need to come in." "You have brought an orc warrior to my door," Reel said, not accusatory, more the way a man states a complicated equation he is working through. "She is with me," Clayton said. "She is trustworthy and she is hurt and we are on the same side as you. Alvar Seld is dead. Voss's men hit the Greymark Company at Thornback. She is the only one who got out and she has Alvar's ledger." Oscar Reel went very still. "Come inside," he said. The boy was there. He was small for 15, thin from a winter's short rations, with his father's dark eyes and a silence around him that was the silence of someone who had been frightened for a very long time and had learned to fit themselves into as small a space as possible. He looked at Zarkha with the wide eyes that humans often gave orcs when they were not expecting one, but Zarkha handled it the way she always handled it. She simply looked back at him with those amber eyes, level and direct, and after a moment the boy looked at her the way you look at anything that is simply what it is. "Colt Brennick," Zarkha said. The boy lifted his chin slightly. "Yes. Your father's keep has been taken by a man who has sent killers to find you. You need to come with us." "I know," the boy said. "I have been waiting for someone to come." Oscar Reel made a sound that was approximately half relief and half grief, and went to pack what the boy would need for the road. They were back in Harrow's Reach by late afternoon, the sky going the deep blue-gray of early winter dark, the temperature dropping hard as the sun's pale presence withdrew from the horizon. Clayton brought them in through the back lane behind the inn, the one that ran between the stable wall and the tanner's fence, and rapped the code on Margit's kitchen door 4-2, the old peddler's knock that had meant friend and friend's business on this road for 30 years. Margit was a broad, iron-gray woman who had run this inn for 20 years and who cried exactly once about her dead son and not again, at least not where anyone could see. She opened the door, looked at Zarkha, looked at the boy, looked at Clayton and said, "Inside, all of you. I have soup." Margit's kitchen became, in the next 2 hours, the headquarters of what Clayton supposed you would have to call a small and extremely cold rebellion. The smith Durin arrived when Margit sent her potboy to fetch him, and he brought 2 of his journeymen, one of whom had been a Brennick house guard before the coup. When the house guard saw Colt Brennick standing in Margit's kitchen, he made a sound like a man surfacing from deep water. The ledger went around the table. Durin's big hands turned the pages slowly. The house guard, his name was Fenwick, and he was 30 and built like the anvils he had been working beside for the past 4 years, read every entry twice. "This is enough," Fenwick said. "If we can get this to Lord Calder at Ashford, this is enough to demand a council hearing. Voss cannot survive a council hearing with this evidence." "Ashford is 8 days south in this weather," Clayton said. "6, if you know the road properly," Zarkha said. Everyone looked at her. She looked back at them with her arms folded, the firelight doing what firelight did to her face, and she said, "I know the South Road. I have ridden it in worse conditions. I can carry the ledger and I can carry the boy if the horse will take the weight, and I can be at Ashford in 6 days." "You are stitched together with 10 loops of thread," Clayton said. "Yes," she agreed. "I have ridden in worse condition than this." This, he knew, was factually true and therefore unanswerable. "Not alone," he said. She looked at him. "Not alone," he said again. "I know the back routes better than the main road. I know where the wayhouses are, where the ice is safe, where the shortcuts cross. 6 days alone in this weather with that wound is reckless. 6 days with both of us is manageable." "And the town?" she asked. "If Voss's 2 men arrive here tomorrow and find nothing, then Margit tells them she has not seen an orc warrior, which is technically true as of tomorrow morning," Margit said. without looking up from her soup. And Durin and Fenwick deal with the consequences. We have managed Voss's bullies for 4 years. 2 more men is not a different problem. Zarkha looked at Margit for a long moment. Then she looked back at Clayton, and something in her face had settled, the kind of settling that meant a decision was made. 6 days, she said. They left before dawn. It was the kind of travel that stripped everything down to its essentials: roads, weather, bodies, and what was necessary. Clayton had made fast winter runs before, trading urgency for comfort, covering ground by lantern light and sleeping 4 hours in wayhouse stables with the horses. He was not as strong as Zarkha, and he was not as fast, but he knew these roads the way he knew his own hands, and twice he cut them onto tracks that the map would not have shown any outlander, paths that clipped 2 hours from the journey each time. Colt Brennick rode between them, quiet and resilient in the way young people were when they had been afraid for a long time, and then found themselves in motion towards something instead of simply hiding. He asked few questions and answered the ones put to him directly, and on the second night, when they sheltered in a wayhouse that was half stone and half timber on the edge of the Coldwater Flats, he sat by the small fire while Zarkha checked her stitches and Clayton repacked supplies, and he said, "Are you 2 together?" Both of them stopped what they were doing. "We are riding together," Zarkha said. "I know that," Colt said. "I mean together." Clayton caught Zarkha's eye across the fire. The amber of it was complicated in a specific way, the way it got when she was deciding how much truth to use. "That is a long question," Clayton said. "You watch each other all the time," Colt said, with the particular clarity of a young person who has had nothing to do but observe for months. "She checks where you are every few minutes. You do it too, like you need to know the other one is still there." He shrugged. "My father used to watch my mother that way." A silence fell over the wayhouse that was not uncomfortable. Zarkha looked at Clayton across the fire for a long count, and then she looked away into the middle distance and she said, "Go to sleep, boy." He went to sleep. Clayton and Zarkha did not sleep immediately. They sat on opposite sides of the dying fire with the horses shifting quietly in the back of the wayhouse and the wind doing its eternal business with the eaves, and Zarkha said, not looking at him, 4 years is a long time." "Yes," he said, "I thought about coming back. I know." The contract kept extending. The situation in the high reaches was she stopped, tried again. "I told myself the roads were bad." "The roads were bad," he said. "They are always bad. That is what roads are." She turned and looked at him then, and the dying firelight was soft and amber, and there were shadows on her face that made it somehow more itself. The strong jaw and the high bones and those extraordinary amber eyes and the tusks that caught the light. "I should not have stayed away," she said. He looked back at her, and the plain truth of what he felt sat right there in his chest, warm and inconvenient and not going anywhere. "No," he said, "you should not have." She held his gaze for a long moment, and then she moved, unfolding herself from the other side of the fire with her characteristic deliberate grace despite the wound, and she crossed the distance between them and she sat down beside him, very close, her shoulder against his, her warmth enormous and real and present. He did not move. He was afraid of startling her the way you did not startle something you had been waiting for. She reached across and took his hand in both of hers. Her hands were extraordinary, massive and capable, scarred across the knuckles, warm despite the cold, and she held his with a precision and care that made his chest hurt. "Clayton," she said. "Yes," he said, meaning several things at once. She turned and looked at him from very close, and her face had come open in a way he had only seen twice before, both times 4 years ago in the same specific combination of firelight and honesty, and she said, "I am not good at staying. I have never been good at staying." "I know," he said, "but I came back here," she said, "to your gate at midnight. I did not go to any other gate." "I know," he said again. "I am telling you that means something." "Yes." "I know it does," he said. And then, because the distance had become untenable, because 4 years of absence and 1 night of bleeding at his gate and 3 days of riding together had reduced the thing between them to its simplest, most honest form, he leaned forward and kissed her. She kissed him back immediately and without hesitation, her hand coming up to his jaw, her thumb against his cheekbone. And the kiss had everything in it that the first one had had 4 years ago. That certainty, that recognition, that sense of arriving somewhere you had been traveling toward without knowing it. She tasted like the pine salt of road travel, and she kissed him like she meant every syllable of it. And when they finally broke apart, she pressed her forehead against his temple and breathed out and said nothing at all, which was the most eloquent thing she ever did. They sat like that for a while. Then he pulled the blanket over both of them, and she put her head against his shoulder, which she had never once done 4 years ago because she had never quite let herself, and they slept. On the 4th day, they hit a problem. The village of Cauldron Halt was not large, 60 people, a crossroads tavern, a garrison post that held 4 of Voss's men, but it sat directly on the best of the south roads, and the alternative went 12 miles out of their way over terrain that would cost them a full day they could not spare. Colt was beginning to run a low fever from the cold and the hard riding, nothing dangerous yet but a warning. They needed the direct road. Clayton rode in first alone, because he was known on this road, and because a peddler stopping at a crossroads tavern for hot food and a rest was unremarkable. He assessed the garrison post from the tavern window while he ate 2 men visible at the door, 2 likely inside, and he noted the way the local villagers gave the post a wide berth, the slightly too careful way they crossed the road, the absence of lingering at windows. He noted the tavern keeper, a younger man he had not seen before, who was watching him with the particular attention of someone who might report unusual travelers. He rode back out and found Zarkha and Colt on the back track where he had left them. 4 soldiers, he said, and a tavern keeper I do not know, we go around. That costs us, I know, we go around. The boy is getting a fever. I am not gambling on a garrison post with a sick heir and a ledger that could get all 3 of us killed. Zarkha looked at the sky reading weather, which she did as automatically as breathing, and then at the boy, and then back at Clayton with that flat considering gaze. Yes, she said. Around. The 12 miles took them into the 5th day, and the weather turned on them that evening with the full intent that northern weather brought to bear when it decided you needed to understand who was in charge. The snow came in horizontally, and the temperature dropped past the point where it stopped feeling like cold and started feeling like a decision the world had made about you. They made the wayhouse at the edge of the Fenmer Woods by dark, all 3 of them white-rimed and horse steam-wrapped, and Zarkha got the boy inside first, got him near the fire, checked his temperature and got hot water into him before she saw to her own wound, which had pulled in the hard riding and was seeping again. Clayton watched her do all of this, the absolute competence of it, the particular way she organized herself to be useful before she was careful, the fact that she prioritized a frightened 15-year-old boy's well-being over her own without a single moment's hesitation. And he felt something he had felt for her 4 years ago and had never fully shaken, the specific, bone-deep admiration of watching a person be exactly and entirely what they were. She caught him watching and gave him the fractional look that meant she knew he was watching and she did not object. "The stitches," he said, "I will tend them. Let me, Clayton." "Let me," he said again, and she read the way he said it and held his gaze for a moment and then sat down and let him. He was careful and she was still, and the wind beat against the wayhouse walls, and outside the snow had begun to build in deep sculpted drifts. He retightened the linen, replaced the drawing salve, checked the stitches, all 10 were holding, the wound was angry but clean, and when he was done she turned and looked at him over her shoulder from very close and said, "It is strange how ordinary this is." "Is it?" he said. "Being tended," she said. I do not allow it usually." "I know." He smoothed the linen bandage and sat back. "You allowed it at the gate." "I was not in a position to stop you." "Yes, you were," he said. "You could have told me to leave off, you would have." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the storm delivered its verdict on the night. "Yes," she said finally, "I would have." On the 6th day they rode into Ashford. Ashford was a market town of real size, walled and gated, with a keep on the eastern hill that flew Lord Calder's banner, a silver hawk on black, and a main street busy even in deep winter with the commerce of a district seat. Clayton had traded here a dozen times, and he knew the customs house clerk and the gate guards by name. He got them through the gates without difficulty, and they went directly to the keep. Lord Calder turned out to be a brisk man in his 60s with the look of a soldier who had retired from the field but not from the habit of command. He received them in his hall with his household captain and his clerk, and he looked at the ledger for a long time, and he looked at Colt Brennick for longer, and when he finally looked up at Clayton and Zarkha standing together on the other side of his table, he said, "Where did you come from?" "Harrow's Reach," Clayton said. 6 days in this weather." Calder looked at Zarkha's warrior leathers at the set of her at the short swords at her back. "You are Steeljaw," he said. "Yes," she said. "I have heard of you." He held her gaze steadily and without any of the usual human machinery of discomfort that orcs tended to produce. "You were with the Greymark Company." "I was. Seld was a man I trusted. He was a man worth trusting," she said. "He died well." Calder was quiet for a moment. Then he closed the ledger with the particular decisiveness of a man who has made a judgment and will not revisit it. "You have brought me what I need to take this before the High Council," he said. "That council convenes in 20 days at Greyston. With this evidence and the heir in my keeping, we can demand Voss be stripped of the keep and face trial." He looked at Colt. "You are your father's son, boy. Will you stand before the council?" Colt lifted his chin in exactly the way he had done when Zarkha asked him his name at Reel's Mill. "Yes," he said. "Then you have my protection until that day." Calder turned back to Clayton and Zarkha. "I can offer you rooms here, rest, supplies, whatever you need to recover from the road." He paused. "And I would have your testimony for the council if you are willing to give it." "We are," Clayton said. Calder nodded. Looked at them both once more, the slight particular look of a sharp-eyed man taking careful inventory. "Good," he said. "Welcome to Ashford." They stayed at Ashford for 4 days before the first messenger arrived. The messenger came from Harrow's Reach, from Margit, which meant he was trustworthy, and the news he carried was mixed. The 2 men following Zarkha had indeed arrived in Harrow's Reach the day after they left, and Margit had told them with perfect honesty that she had not seen an orc warrior in her inn. The 2 men had searched the town, found nothing, and after 2 days had ridden south on the main road, which was not the road Clayton and Zarkha had taken. They were therefore somewhere behind them, possibly tracking, possibly not, and Fenwick had sent his own rider south to warn the next 2 district posts. The second piece of news was grimmer. Voss, apparently informed that the Greymark Company had been hit and that 1 member had escaped with something, had stationed additional riders on the road between Harrow's Reach and Ashford. He did not yet know where his quarry had gone, but he was closing the net. Calder's response to this information was to double his gate guards and send out his own fast riders to the council members, calling for an early convening at 3 weeks out. And Zarkha spent 2 days in Calder's training yard, not because she needed to train, but because she needed to move, needed to work the wound through controlled exertion rather than let it tighten with rest, and the yard was the place for it. Clayton watched her train on the second afternoon from the walkway above, and this was the moment that people talked about for a very long time afterward in Ashford. Calder had 2 professional soldiers on his household roster, veterans, the kind of men who had spent 20 years in campaign conditions and were therefore capable and confident, and, unfortunately, also the kind of men who had a long familiarity with the human tendency to underestimate orc warriors until it was too late for the lesson to be useful. One of them, a man named Gretsch, wide-shouldered and red-faced with the look of someone who found themselves perpetually underappreciated, decided to demonstrate this tendency in public, with an audience. The training yard was always busy in the afternoon. Soldiers, guardsmen, stable boys watching from the fence rail, perhaps 30 people, And when Zarkha took the training pole from the rack and began running through her forms, she drew attention the way she always drew attention, because she was extraordinary to watch even just in drills. The precision of it, the economy, the fact that she moved something that large with something that quiet. Gretch walked into the middle of the yard with two of his men, and he said, loud enough for the yard to hear, that perhaps the orc understood the pole, but a real weapon would be different, and whether she wanted to demonstrate against a real opponent, or whether she would prefer to keep swinging in empty air like a practice dummy. The yard went quiet. Clayton leaned on the walkway rail and did not say anything. Zarkha turned and looked at Gretch with those amber eyes, and she said, "What do you want to wager?" Gretch said he would wager whatever she cared to name. Zarkha said, "Then wager your certainty. If I win, you stop talking." Gretch laughed. His men laughed. Several of the audience laughed, because a large armed man laughing is usually funny until it stops being funny. What happened next took approximately 40 seconds. Gretch came at her with full professional intent, which was to his credit. He was not careless. He did not underestimate her size and reach. He read the situation correctly as a real physical contest and applied his full capability. He was good. In a fight against most people in this yard, he would have won in 20 seconds or less. He came in hard with the training sword, feinted right, went left, exactly the move he had used 1,000 times. Zarkha did not step back. She stepped inside his guard, her pole arm abandoned, and she used her hands. She took his sword arm at the wrist with her left hand and his collar with her right hand, and she lifted him. She lifted him entirely off the ground, a man of 200 pounds, clean and vertical, at arm's length, as if she were lifting a sack of grain to check its weight. She held him there, at full extension, for 4 full seconds, which was long enough for every single person in that yard to understand precisely what was happening and what it implied about the full range of her capability. She set him down. Gretch's feet found the cobblestones, and he stood there, and his sword hand was empty, and his face had the specific expression of a man who has just recalibrated something fundamental. The yard was absolutely silent. Zarkha turned and looked around at the full ring of faces with those amber eyes, steady and direct, and then she went and picked up her training pole and went back to her forms as if nothing had occurred, because as far as she was concerned, nothing particularly had. Clayton, on the walkway above, felt something complicated happen in his chest that was part astonishment and part pure, unreasonable pride, and part the very particular feeling of watching someone you love be entirely themselves in a room full of people who will never forget it. The yard stayed quiet for a solid minute. Then Fenwick, who had arrived with Margit's messenger and was now standing at the far corner of the rail, started laughing, a pure and helpless sound, and several of the stable boys joined him. And then the yard was loud again, and Gretch quietly retrieved his sword and went inside. He did not bother Zarkha again. In the evening, Clayton went to the small guest room. Calder had given them 1 room, 2 beds, both sensible and inadequate for what they both understood was actually the situation, and Zarkha was sitting on the edge of the far bed, rewrapping her wrist where the training had pressed a bruise, and he sat down on the other bed and looked at her and said, "Gretch." "Yes," she said. He was very sure of himself. "Yes." She pulled the wrap taut. He was wrong. As it turned out, he paused. "You could have broken his arm." "Yes," she said. "You did not." "I wanted him to be able to do his job tomorrow," she said. "He will need both arms for that." She tilted her head. "Also, I did not want to give Calder a reason to regret having us here." "Sensible," Clayton said. She finished with the wrap and looked at him, and the amber eyes had that particular quality they sometimes had, the one that was warm and amused and something deeper all at once. "You watched," she said. "Everyone watched. You watched differently." He held her gaze and did not deny it. "Yes," he said, "I did." She crossed the room and sat down beside him on his bed, very close, the way she had in the Way-house, close enough that the warmth of her came right through his jacket, and she looked at him from that small distance with those amber eyes, and she said, I want to tell you something." "Tell me," he said. "When I was riding south with the wound and the ledger," she said. "When I was 2 days out and I had lost the Greymark people and I was trying to decide where I was going, there was never actually a decision. I did not think about it. I simply knew where I was going." She paused. "That has never happened to me before. I have been on worse roads in worse condition and I have always made a deliberate choice. This was not a choice. It was—" She stopped again. Searched for the word with the precision she brought to everything. "It was the way water runs downhill. I just went." He was quiet for a moment. "That is the most romantic thing you have ever said to me," he said. She made a sound that was almost a laugh and was definitely surprised, and she looked away for a second and then back, and the expression on her face was wide open, stripped of the usual careful architecture, and she reached up and put her hand against his jaw the way she had in the Way House when they had kissed, and she said, "I am not romantic." "You are exactly as romantic as you need to be," he said. "For me." She kissed him, and the kiss was different than the Way House kiss, slower, more deliberate, the kind of kiss that carries a specific weight of intention. Her hand stayed on his jaw and her other hand found the lapel of his jacket, and he felt her exhale against his mouth, and everything was warm and certain and present. He brought his hand up to the back of her neck, into the thick dark fall of her hair, and held her there carefully, and she made a low sound that he felt more than heard. They stayed like that for a long time, and the rest of it followed in the way things do when two people have been circling each other for 4 years and have finally agreed to stop, not rushed, not careless, but inevitable and warm and deeply, thoroughly mutual. And if the night in Calder's guest room in Ashford was not precisely glamorous, it was exactly what it needed to be, which was honest and tender and long overdue. In the morning everything was simpler, not solved, not without stakes or complications. The council was still 20 days out, Voss was still in the keep, and Gretsch was still nursing his dignity. But simpler, the way things become when the central question is finally answered. The central question had been answered. The 3 weeks leading up to the council convening at Greyston were not quiet ones. Calder moved Colt Brennick south to Greyston under heavy guard, with Fenwick as part of the escort because the boy had begun to trust him. Clayton and Zarkha rode with the supply column, which was the safest way to travel in numbers, and twice on the road they encountered riders carrying Voss's warrant, a formal document announcing that the orc mercenary known as Steeljaw was wanted for questioning in connection with the deaths of 4 of Lord Voss's road agents. 4, Zarkha said when they read the warrant by torchlight. "You said 2 were dead," Clayton said. "They were. The other 2 must have died of their own incompetence on the North Road." She handed the warrant back to Calder's rider. "I accept no responsibility for that." "The warrant is theater," Calder said, not looking up from his map. "Voss is trying to establish a legal context before the council convenes. It will not hold. He cannot suppress testimony and evidence from a sitting council." He folded his map and looked at Zarkha with his direct soldier's gaze. "Your testimony is central to this case. Will you stand?" "Yes," she said. The council at Greyston was held in a long hall of pale stone, and it was attended by 9 lords, 4 mediators, and the council's lawkeeper, a woman named Hora Stave who had the appearance of someone's grandmother and the procedural precision of a siege engine. Voss was present, having apparently decided that absence would look like guilt. He was a tall man, pale, with a controlled, watchful quality that Clayton recognized as the look of someone who was always calculating odds. Voss looked at Zarkha when she entered the hall, and something moved behind his eyes that was the calculation of someone assessing a threat, and not liking the assessment. He looked at Clayton and dismissed him, which was the last mistake Voss made in a long career of bad judgment. The hearing lasted 2 days. The ledger was entered into evidence. Fenwick testified about the week of the coup. Colt Brennick stood before 9 lords and the lawkeeper and spoke with a quiet, direct certainty that was not much like his mother's easy warmth, which Clayton had heard of, and very much like his father's stubborn honesty. And Zarkha Steeljaw stood at the witness mark and was questioned for 4 hours straight by Voss's advocate, and she answered every question with the same flat precision she brought to everything, without hedging, without elaboration, without weakness. And when the advocate suggested that an orc mercenary's testimony could not be considered reliable because of the inherent conflict of interest in being paid for one's work, Horastave asked the advocate whether he considered it more reliable to receive testimony from a man who had seized a keep he had no legal right to, and the advocate sat down. At the end of the second day, the council voted. 7-2. Voss was stripped of the keep. He was to be held for trial on the specific charges of unlawful seizure, conspiracy to murder, and the deaths of the Greymark Company. Colt Brennick was recognized as the true heir of Harrow's Keep, to be held in Calder's guardianship until he came of age. Voss received this verdict with a stillness that was genuinely dangerous, and that evening there was an incident in the corridor outside the hall where 2 of Voss's remaining loyalists tried to intercept the rider carrying Colt to Calder's custody, and Zarkha, who had anticipated this exact possibility and had been standing in the correct corridor, dealt with both of them in approximately the time it took Clayton to round the corner and see what was happening. The 2 men were on the floor. They were alive. They would have bruises of memorable severity for several weeks. Colt was behind Zarkha's shoulder, looking slightly shaken and mostly impressed. Clayton looked at the 2 men on the floor and at Zarkha and at Colt and said, "Everyone whole?" "Yes," said Zarkha. "Good," he said. "Let's get him to Calder." They delivered Colt Brennick to Lord Calder's custody at midnight on the second day of the council hearing, and Calder received the boy with the brisk warmth of a man who was not comfortable with visible emotion but felt it nonetheless, and he looked at Clayton and Zarkha over the boy's head and he said, "You have done a significant thing. Both of you." "We had the ledger," Zarkha said. "Alvar Seld did the significant thing." "The ledger needed carrying," Calder said. "It needed the right people to carry it. That was you." He paused. "What do you intend now?" Clayton looked at Zarkha. Zarkha looked at Clayton. It was one of those moments that did not require a conversation to navigate. Something was simply known the way it had been simply known to her on the road south with a wound and a ledger, the way water ran downhill. "North," Clayton said. "Harrow's Reach." Calder looked at them with those sharp old eyes and nodded once, and that was that. They rode north in the thaw's early promise, when the days had just begun to outlast the nights by a fraction, and the snow was still deep, but the sky had started to have blue in it again. Real spring-coming blue rather than the winter iron they had been under since first frost. They rode without urgency for the first time in weeks, side by side on the wide road with the horses in a comfortable walk, and the light coming long and golden from the south, and the entire enormous world open on all sides. Clayton had been thinking, somewhere in the long, deliberate stretch of the council proceedings and the waiting and the work of testimony, about what came after. He had been a peddler and a trader his whole adult life. He knew the roads. He knew the routes, the way-houses, the crossing points, the seasons, the prices. He was good at it, and it was honest work, and it had kept him, and it had kept his small trading post in Harrow's Reach going through 4 winters. But it was solitary work. It had always been solitary. He had never minded solitary. Until 4 years ago, when a woman had come to his table to argue about a map price, and then the solitary had been a different kind of thing, the kind that had a shape to it. He was thinking about this, riding north in the early thaw, when Zarkha said, "You are quiet." "Thinking," he said. "About what?" He looked over at her. She was riding easy, her dark hair loose today, the sun on her face and her amber eyes half narrowed against the Brighton snow light. She had gotten new lacing for her bodice at Ashford. The original left side lacings had been cut away to access the wound, and she had replaced them with red cord, which against the dark charcoal leather was striking and unmistakable and very Zarkha. "The trading post," he said. "What comes next?" She looked back at him. "What are your thoughts?" "The North Road is better with 2, he said. "Better surveyed, better covered, better company." He paused. And a scout who knows every pass and back route in the region is not a small advantage for a trader on northern routes. She was quiet for a moment, riding. Then, "Are you offering me a business arrangement?" "I am offering you whatever you want," he said. "Business arrangement, partnership, the whole thing. The trading post and the routes and the long winters and all of it." He held her gaze over the distance between the horses. "I am telling you that I would like you to stay, not as a favor. Not out of obligation. Because I want you there and I think you want to be there, and I am done pretending those are separate things." Zarkha was quiet for a long stretch of road, long enough that the horses covered a quarter-mile in the silence. Then she said, "There is something you should know about orc tradition." "Tell me." "When an orc warrior chooses a person," she said, "it is not a provisional thing. It is not evaluated season by season, renegotiated when circumstances change. It is a full commitment." She looked at him steadily. "It is called Karak Ven, the choosing. When I say I choose someone, it means I choose them in the way the bone chooses the marrow. It is not reversible." She paused. "I am telling you this because I want you to understand what you are accepting if you ask me to stay." Clayton looked at her for a moment in the long golden light. "Zarkha," he said, "yes. I asked you 4 years ago," he said. "Not in those words, but I asked." She held his gaze. Something moved in her face that was enormous and quiet all at once. "Yes," she said, "you did. And you went north." "Yes. And then you came back." "Yes." "Bleeding," he said. "Yes," she said, and now the corner of her mouth was moving in that way it did that was more specific than a smile. "And I opened the gate," he said. "You did. And you stayed." "I stayed," she said. He looked at her and the light was perfect and the road was wide and the whole northern landscape was opening in the first breath of spring. "Then we already know how this goes," he said. "We have known for 4 years." She held his gaze for another long moment, and then she said, with a weight and simplicity that was the full gravity of Karakven in 4 words, "I choose you, Clayton." He felt it in his chest the way you feel something true, not like being struck but like a key turning. "I choose you back," he said. She rode a half-step closer and reached across, and her hand found his on the reins, briefly, firmly. And then she let go and they rode on. And the sky was blue, and the snow was bright, and somewhere ahead was the stone building at Harrow's Reach with the gate and the lean-to, and the fire he always kept through northern winters. And none of it was much on its own, but it was the place where she ended up. They arrived at Harrow's Reach on a clear morning 8 days into the thaw. The town had changed in the months of their absence, though changed was too strong a word for it, shifted, perhaps. The removal of Voss's authority, even at a distance, even pending the formal transfer of governance to Brennick's caretaker council, had worked on the place the way spring worked on ice-locked ground. Not visibly, not dramatically, but in the way things softened and opened when the thing pressing down on them was lifted. Margit had rehung her ensign, which had been taken down the first winter of Voss's tenure for reasons she had never explained. Duran's forge was running 3 bellows now instead of 1. People stood in the street and talked at ordinary volume. Margit came out of her kitchen door when they rode around the back lane, and she looked at them for 1 complete second, and then she said, "I assume it went well," and went back inside, and from within her voice carried out, "I have soup." Zarkha's horse made a sound that was very probably approval. The trading post was as Clayton had left it, which is to say cold and slightly dusty and entirely functional. He built the fire. She checked the lean-to, found it solid, settled both horses. He had dry goods still in the store, enough for a week before he would need to restock, and he put water on and unlocked the shutters and let the first real springish light of the year into the front room. She came in through the front door with her saddlebags over her shoulder and the second short sword she had recovered from the road somewhere in the journey, and she looked around the room with those amber eyes in the way. She always looked around anew to her space, cataloging exits and angles and lines of sight in the first pass, and then softening into something more present in the second. And then she put her saddlebags down on the table and sat down in the chair that had become, in some unremarked way, her chair 4 years ago, and she was in his trading post, in his chair, at his table in the firelight, alive and whole and here. He stood with his hands in the water-heating pot for a moment and looked at her. She met his gaze and did not look away. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Nothing at all." The weeks that followed were the work of re-establishing, restocking the trading post, riding the early thaw routes to check which roads had survived the winter and which needed bridging, repairing the lean-to roof where a bad night's snow had pressed a board loose. Clayton went back to his rounds, and Zarkha went with him, and what she had called the practical advantages of her knowledge of the back routes proved itself immediately. She knew passes he had avoided for years as unridable in winter that were in fact perfectly navigable if you knew a specific shelf of rock on the north face, and she knew crossings and waypoints that were not on any map he had because she had mapped them herself over years of contract work on these roads. It turned the 3-day circuit he usually ran in 4 days. It opened 2 new trading settlements he had not reached before, a cluster of homesteads in the Coldwater Flats that had been undersupplied for years and needed dry goods badly enough that the prices were excellent. Within 2 months of their return, the trading post at Harrow's Reach was doing the best business Clayton Turner had ever run. It was not only the practical advantage, it was the company. The thing about solitary work was that you forgot, over years of it, the specific quality of doing work alongside someone who was also very good at the work, the way tasks collapsed when 2 capable people organized around them, the way the long hours on the road contracted when there was someone to talk to argue with, to sit beside in a wayhouse while the weather held you, and the fire was good and neither of you needed to perform any particular version of yourself. He did not talk about this. He did not need to. She was there and she knew, the way she knew most things fully and without requiring it to be said. In the early summer, about 3 months after their return, a messenger arrived from Ashford with a letter from Lord Calder. Colt Brennick was doing well. The trial of Aldrich Voss had concluded the previous month with a conviction on all charges. The caretaker council for Harrow's Keep had been formally constituted and would govern until Colt came of age in 3 years. Calder wrote that he considered the ledger and the testimony provided by Clayton Turner and Zarkha Steeljaw to have been essential to the outcome, and he enclosed a writ of formal gratitude from the council, which was a legal document that essentially meant they would both receive favorable treatment from the district courts for the rest of their natural lives, which was not nothing on the northern roads. Zarkha read the letter twice, standing at the table, and then she set it down. "He mentions us together," she said. "Throughout," Clayton agreed. He had read it over her shoulder. "Calder has careful language. He would not do that accidentally." She looked up. "He considers us a unit." "We are a unit," Clayton said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "I want to show you something." She went to her saddlebag, which lived on its hook by the door, and she took out a small item he had not seen before, something she had been carrying for months apparently without showing him. A carved bone disc on a thin leather cord. The carving was dense and precise, concentric patterns with 2 interlocking symbols in the center. He looked at it in her palm without touching it. "What is it?" he asked. "Karak cord," she said. "Orc tradition. When the choosing is made, both people carry one. They are made as a pair. Mine matches yours." She tilted her palm. "I made yours while you were doing the route inventory this morning." He looked at the disc in her hand and he felt the particular gravity of it, the weight of a thing that was not elaborate or expensive or performed, just made and real and offered. "Show me the other one," he said. She reached into the neck of her bodice and pulled out an identical disc, slightly more worn. She had been wearing hers longer. The carvings matched, the symbols interlocked. "You made this when?" he asked. "On the road from Ashford," she said. "After the wayhouse, after she paused. I had time to think on the ride. I had decided. I wanted to make it when the deciding was clear." She looked at him steadily. "I was waiting for the right moment to give you yours." "This is the right moment," he said. She put the cord over his head and it settled against his chest. He lifted it in his fingers for a moment and felt the carved bone, precise and warm from her hand. Then he let it fall and looked up at her. She was watching him with those amber eyes, and the expression on her face was the full open thing, the one she only showed him, the one she did not have a name for that he had a name for, because he had known it from the first time he saw it, and he had been calling it by that name in the private country of his own chest for 4 years. He stepped forward and he kissed her in the good direct light of a summer morning, his hands on her face, her hands on his shoulders, the cord warm against his chest, and the whole trading post was quiet and right and ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Summer went long and golden. The roots ran well. Harrow's Reach grew by 12 families who moved in from the outlying homesteads now that Voss's riders were gone, drawn by the stability that the new caretaker council was establishing. And Clayton's trading post became, by the end of summer, the busiest commercial operation in the outpost. He expanded the front room, added a second counter, took on a boy of 16 named Pell as a stockroom assistant who turned out to have an excellent head for inventory. Zarkha ran the road surveys. She had the maps of the region more thoroughly and accurately in her head than any document that existed, and she began, at Clayton's suggestion, the project of writing them down, making the first truly comprehensive route map of the Harrow's Reach district, every pass and crossing and seasonal variance documented, with annotations on conditions and waypoints. It was meticulous work that suited her, and it produced something genuinely valuable, the kind of document that traders and councils and caretaker administrators all needed, and nobody had ever bothered to make. She worked on the maps at the table in the evening after supper by lamplight, with her dark hair loose and her reading glasses, a luxury item Clayton had sourced from the Ashford optician, because she had been squinting at fine ink for years without admitting she needed them sitting on the bridge of her nose, and she was magnificent and entirely herself, and Clayton would sit across from her doing his ledgers, and occasionally she would look up and find him watching her, and the amber eyes would give him that look, warm and direct and slightly amused, and she would go back to her maps. In the late autumn, Fenwick arrived from Ashford to take up the position of garrison captain at the new Harrow's Reach district post, which Colt's caretaker council had approved in the summer resolutions. He arrived with 6 soldiers and a wagon of equipment, and he knocked on the trading post door the first evening, and Zarkha opened it, and he looked at her and then passed her at Clayton, and then at the inside of the trading post. The twin chairs by the fire, the pair of lamps, the maps on the wall, and said, "Right, I see how it is," and came in for supper. The winter settled back over Harrow's Reach with its full northern weight, the long dark nights and the deep cold and the particular quality of stillness that only came when every living thing was hunkered into its warmth, and the world outside was nothing but blue-white and silence. Clayton kept the fire well, the way he always had, and now he kept it for 2 instead of 1, and the difference was not a small one. He had always been adequate to himself. He had always been competent and present and capable of handling what came, and the solitary life had not broken him. But he understood now, in the bone-certain way that you only understood things through their direct experience, what it was to not be alone. Not just to have company, but to have her specific company, her absolute directness, her monstrous competence, the way she argued with genuine investment in being right and conceded with genuine grace when she was wrong, the way she sat beside him at a fire or a table and was entirely, solidly present in the way only someone who had chosen to be there was present. She had chosen. She had come back. She was here. On a night in deep winter, maybe 4 months after the cord, they were sitting by the fire after a long day. He had come back from a supply run on the Coldwater route, and she had spent the day finishing the last of the northern approaches section of the map. And she put the map down and looked at him across the fire and said, "You are good at this." "At what?" he said. "At being here," she said. "At making a place that a person wants to come back to." She paused. "I have spent most of my adult life moving. I was never staying, has always felt like a loss of something, like a door closing." "I know," he said. "Here it does not feel like that," she said. Here it feels like doors opening." He looked at her across the fire with the lamp burning warm between them and the winter pressing its full weight against the walls and the fire doing its ancient good work. And he felt, not for the first time and not for the last time, the specific gift of being wanted by Zarkha Steeljaw. The magnitude of what it meant that she had chosen him, the woman who was afraid of nothing and owed nothing and could have gone anywhere. She had come to his gate at midnight. She had stayed. "Good," he said. She picked up her map again. He went back to his ledger. Outside, the winter was entire and the fire was good, and the trading post at Harrow's Reach had 2 people in it who were exactly where they had chosen to be. A year after the night she arrived at his gate, on an evening in the first real warmth of the following spring. They sat outside on the bench by the trading post door, and the air had that green edge to it, that particular northern spring smell of snow melt and new mud and something underneath it that was the world opening back up. And the light was long and golden from the west, and her shoulder was against his, and the karak cord was warm on his chest, and the whole enormous northern world was doing what it did, which was turn and change and continue, and here they were in the middle of it, entirely at home. She had her hand in his. She was looking at the road. "This time last year," she said. "You were bleeding," he said. "I was going to say I was somewhere north of Thornback in the dark," she said. "But yes, also bleeding. Did you know you were coming here?" She turned and looked at him with those amber eyes in the last of the golden light. "Yes," she said. "I always knew." He squeezed her hand and she leaned her head against his shoulder, and the spring air moved around them and the road was open, and the fire was inside waiting, and all of Harrow's Reach was going about its spring-coming business in the middle distance. And there was nothing missing, and nothing unresolved, and nobody left behind. And for Clayton Turner, who had spent 15 years on the roads and 4 years in the particular solitude of almost having something, it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything he had not let himself be quite honest about wanting, until the night it arrived bleeding at his gate and stayed. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed the back of it, her scarred and capable knuckles, and she made a low sound that was entirely content and entirely hers. Spring came to Harrow's Reach, and Zarkha Steeljaw stayed.